Hello, I'm Becky Goldsmith with Piece of Cake. I want to talk to you now about how to pin an outer point. There is another video on the site that talks to you about pinning in general. And when you normally pin your applique, you run your pins 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the applique piece. Now I want to zoom in here just a little bit. Let me talk to you first about where you are more likely to be putting your pins now. If you put your pin inside the point, as I did here, and this is what I see many people doing when I teach classes, I would ask you, what exactly is holding the end of that point in position? Really, there's nothing. So if you're having trouble with your points waving off to the side as you sew, you might look to your pinning. So how would I suggest that you pin this? Well, I'll show you. As I said in another video, I've already shown you that I keep my pins parallel to the line I'm going to sew, and I keep them 1/4 of an inch away from that line so that there's room for the turn under allowance to turn under. Here, if I'm sewing from right to left with the horizon, as most of you probably do, when I'm sewing this line, I want that line to be held in place all the way to the end. Then I'll stop and I'll make a tack stitch, and then I'll turn and sew the other side. So when I'm pinning an outer point, I would put this pin right here. It is parallel to the line I'm going to sew. It's 1/4 of an inch away from this line that is the first side of the point. And it's 1/4 of an inch away so that the seam allowance will turn under without me having to move the pin. Now that's if I'm sewing from right to left with the horizon. I also show you how to turn an outer point sewing vertically or toward yourself in another video. I want to show those of you who sew that direction where you would put your pin. And that would be, let me turn this just a little bit more. That would be right here. Now, in both cases, flatten that out just a bit, the part of the pin doing the work is holding the end of this line in position. Now, if I were sewing vertically, I would sew down this line, stop and do a tack stitch, and then of course I would have to remove this pin so that I could turn and sew the other way. And I will go back to the first direction I showed, which is the way most of you sew. In this case, if my pin were here, and I would have lots more pins. Don't get me wrong, this is not the only pin I would have at this point. Whether I was sewing right to left with the horizon or vertically, more toward myself, I would have pins running parallel to the line on both sides of this point, all the way around the shape of the piece. In this case, it's a leaf. So I would have more pins down here. But this pin is following this line of stitching, and it is holding the end of the line all the way to the point, the first side of the point. I would sew to here, do a tack stitch, turn my work. This would be turned down, and then I can take out this pin and continue sewing. It will have done its job. And the same thing is true going the other direction. Sometimes in class, people get confused and where they might have been pinning correctly with their pins parallel to the line and 1/4 of an inch away all along. Once I show this in class, then all of a sudden people will start throwing pins in over the line and perpendicular to it. Please remember that this is only the case on an outer point, and you pin so that the first side of the point that you're going to sew is held firmly in position until you reach the point. For more instructions on how to sew, how to turn under and sew an outer point, there are 2 videos. One addresses sewing from right to left with the horizon. The other video addresses how to sew from top to bottom toward yourself or vertically. I hope this is helpful. Happy stitching!